Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Point podcast with me, Allie Christensen. I'm curating the content I wish I had had as a dancer and creating strong, healthy, thriving dancers for the future. Not only am I your host and ex-professional dancer, but I own Align Fitness, a cross-training studio for dancers here in Costa Mesa, California, and am the creator of online courses for dancers such as the Dancer Strong program, Lower Body Flexibility, and Turnout for Dancers. Welcome back, dancers. Today on the podcast, I have registered dietitian nutritionist, that's a mouthful, Kristin Koskinen, and I am really pleased and excited to have spoken with her and to share our conversation. Now, she has a pretty specific niche in the dance world that she is very knowledgeable about. She works with all dancers, all types, all ages, all disciplines, but her expertise is working with the hypermobile mover athlete. So if you've been following along up to date with me, there has been a lot of hypermobility talk. I have had experts on the podcast. We did a workshop. There's been a lot of stuff on Instagram on it. And Kristin is assisting to fill in a huge blank that if you've been following along, you might have realized we are looking at so much more than just a hypermobile joint when we are talking about a hypermobility syndrome and the spectrum that can fall on. Now, leading into dancer brain here. Leading into this episode, if you have not heard some of the other episodes about hypermobility, I highly suggest that you start with the episode Hypermobility and Dancers here on the podcast. It was released in July 2021, and it's with Dr. Linda Bluestein, who is an expert in hypermobility. She is the doctor who deals with hypermobile dancers. Now, Kristin and Dr. Bluestein actually work together quite frequently because the two tie together so much. And something that we touch on in this podcast quite a bit is how there's these levels of expectation of what we are working on as dancers. And we tend to start with the work in the studio. Then maybe you think, I need some privates. And then if we're lucky, you start to think, I need some cross training. But we're not quite to the common thought that nutrition is what makes it possible for you to perform in the studio, for you to be able to do all the things that your body is being asked of. And when you have a hypermobility syndrome or hypermobile joints, there are other signs and huge factors that can be assisted by nutrition. This was a great conversation. I'm excited for you guys to listen. So let's jump into the episode with Kristin Koskinen. Hi, Kristin. Welcome on the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Allie, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
I'm so excited to talk with you. I have many people in my life who have worked with you or have nothing but amazing things to say about how you work with dancers. So I'm excited to pick your brain a little bit. Thank you for taking time to come here. I know that you're very busy and I appreciate it so much. Can you start off by telling everyone a little bit more about yourself, a little bit about your history and what you do currently?
Yeah, sure. So I started off, I grew up as a dancer. I actually have background in competitive dance. I really spent most of my time and love in a pre-professional company, so classical ballet. And then when I finished my kind of structured ballet dance career in college, I was a cheerleader, which was effectively college dance back in that time. So that was my dance background. And while I was doing all those things, that's when my interest in nutrition started, because there was all this talk about diets and weight loss, and occasionally talk about, what you should eat before a performance, which was really performance nutrition. And that's all I had. But I knew that there had to be more than this overwhelming weight loss capacity. And so that is where I set my course of study. And now I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist. I work with dancers across North America. I work with companies. I speak with colleges. I work with the hypermobile community a lot, whether they are artistic athletes or not. And I've also spent a lot of time as a dance mom. So I have a perspective kind of as being in it, being a professional, and then being the support staff.
Yeah. Oh, well, I have so many questions for you now. You brought up the term performance nutrition. And I think that this is still not something that's really recognized by the average dancer. is that there is different types of nutrition that we would be focusing on, or that your particular body would need to focus on. Weight loss seems to be the idea of diet. When you say the word diet, it means weight loss in so many people's minds. We can use the word diet in many different ways. And then there's also different ways to be approaching the food you put into your body for the purpose. So with dancers, what is what's a clarification that you have to make commonly between performance and other dieting, or we'll say weight loss?
Right. That's a great question, Allie. I will start with the first thing is sometimes the common sense or general recommendation area. And what we need to understand is the general recommendations and common sense apply most often to the general public, the general adult public, not to dancers. Dancers are not the general public. For one, they are highly trained athletes. They spend more time in activity and training than most people. Oftentimes they are young. We're looking at kids, they're pediatric, really. They're 18 and under. And so they may have different needs as related to growth and those kinds of things. So that's one thing. So when we look at recommendations set out by the government, they may or may not, those may be starting points, but that's not a point where you want to necessarily end. And some of those recommendations may actually work against you if you're a dancer or hypermobile. The other thing is when we look at weight loss versus performance, and this is something, or diet, kind of that diet culture kind of stuff versus performance, which is where we're at. And dancers come to me with that a lot. So they have questions about specific trends or fads or things I saw on TikTok, social media, heard about in the studio. Let's put some names to them so people are familiar. So they may have heard of keto or intermittent fasting or low carb or paleo or any of these things. And they have questions. Is this good for me? And the question comes up is, who's using it? Why are they using it? What's the end purpose? And would it be good for you? So, for example, keto, the origination of the keto diet was to treat children with epilepsy. So if you have a seizure disorder, if you have had a traumatic brain injury, that may be appropriate for you for a time. What they found out is a lot of people were losing, adults can lose weight on this program, but it's not designed for athletes and people who need high levels of energy. So though it may be appropriate in some circles, it doesn't mean it's appropriate for you. And so a lot of things can be appropriate for other people. They may be great for your aunt or for your neighbor or for your dance teacher, but not necessarily for you. So then we start talking about performance nutrition. And that's when we really want to look at what's your end goal. If your end goal is to be a dancer and to perform well and to perform for a long time, we are looking at extending your career as a dance medicine industry. I know you're doing that too. We want to do everything we can to strengthen and serve your body so you can dance as long as you want to. You aren't forced into an early retirement because you broke down.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there one or two things that come up in your mind really quickly when you would think of the general dancer who comes to you thinking they're coming to you for a quote diet that's for weight loss, and you are like, hey, actually what you're telling me is that you want a performance standpoint? Are there a couple of things that like ring true for you that you see in dancers a lot when they make that switch?
Yeah, they really do. They start to, first of all, they develop an idea of food confidence. So we talk about the why. Why are we doing things like why? And we unpack some of the things that aren't true in diet culture. So, and I'll give an example. So white foods are bad. That's not true. White foods can really serve dancers well, particularly before performing or intense training. So if you're thinking about white foods like rice or bread or pasta, they are easy to digest and absorb. And that can be really helpful for you if you have a short time to eat before you have a training session or, a series of like class and rehearsal.
Everyday class.
Yeah. You know what I mean? When you're looking at, you may not have time to eat in between. That can be a great option for you, especially with the short amount of time you may have to eat. So we need to look at that. Do you want to train well? Do you want to train to your maximum capacity, or do you want to go into the studio and feel fatigued, maybe need to lie down and pass out? I have people that are referred to me because this is happening. Or do you want to get in there and maximize your training session so that you are actually improving in your craft? And that's what people want to do. So we want to fuel that effectively. And what we need to do. And so when we look at the performance component, that's different. Dancers don't have normal people schedules. And that's a starting point that we have to look at too. And so when are you going to eat? What's the right thing to eat when? And that's going to vary person to person, but we have some guidelines we might start with. And how are we going to make sure that you're nourishing yourself during the times when maybe you have a little bit more time, as opposed to studio time when things can be really crammed? And we may even be talking about how many bites do you think you can get in during your half-hour break, between getting to your food, maybe washing your hands, we hope, getting to your food, and then putting your point shoes back on, which really can cut that break down to
minutes,
10 minutes maybe. Or if you need to eat outside because COVID, and then you have to find any place to eat and all that kind of stuff. So we worked through some the logistics of what would really work to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, when you have dancers come to you and they realize that they're looking for performance, does that fall into a category for you? I'm going to use those trendy words again. Like, we have people who eat paleo, or people who are keto or vegetarian, and they kind of fall into these confines that I think I know in the past I've I eat like paleo, or I eat like keto. And I've come to realize that I don't eat like anyone. I eat like me. And it's very different depending on what my body needs and different cycles and times of life. So when you're looking at a dancer and you're working with them one-on-one, are there certain things that happen, or are you really looking at the broad picture of this person and creating a plan for them that's really specific?
Yes. Part two. Yes. It is always because here's the thing, in the world, I operate with the basis that N equals 1. So everyone is different. Whoever you're working with, that's who we have in front of us. And we have literature and research, and I have clinical experience that may inform and guide me, but what works for 99 people may not work for the one. That can be very true with hypermobile dancers. That's really true. But when people work with me, I have a pretty extensive medical and nutrition intake form that they fill out in healthcare. So, and then I review that and get an idea of what their needs may be, where there may be some gaps. And I want to hear, what are their concerns? And a lot of dancers will come to me with, they want to be plant-based or vegetarian or vegan. And so we talk through, why is that? Do you have an ethical concern? Is it because you feel like that's healthier? Did someone tell you that was what you should be doing? And so we work through there and then find strategies to meet them where they're at, so they feel comfortable in what they're doing. And sometimes if they do come with, I think I should be keto, vegan, whatever. When we talk about their needs and how we're going to meet them, sometimes that's a good thing, like with a plant-based diet, but most often they find that to really meet their needs on the time constraints they have, they're going to need to be more liberal in their intake.
Do you feel like when you are working with dancers, there's what's the word I'm looking for? I want to say stigma, but there's a preset idea of like what their calories look like. And I guess the caveat to this in my mind is also maybe what those nutrition points should be. Like, I am only allowed to eat this type of thing because I want to lose weight, or I want to have this high performance. I know that this is true. So I guess that's not really a question, but can you comment a little bit on what you see when people come in with preconceived ideas about what it looks like? And then when they start trying it and experiencing in their bodies, what do you see happening with their relationship with food and with the way their performance is actually increasing in the studio?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I do is I really, especially when I start working with dancers, unless your goal is you have a specific need to gain weight, I'll probably never use the term calorie with you.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. If you are struggling to keep weight on, we may need to talk about ways to get more energy in. And sometimes that may be like, hey, I want you to look at the calories on things, and here are some options. But other than that, it's a hard no. And I can think of the number of times that I've had that conversation. It's 2.
But you probably have to have the conversation of, we're not going to talk about calories. We're going to be looking at nutrition and energy and what fuels you.
Right. And I think a lot of people, by the time they followed me on Instagram or they had a referral, they probably have a pretty good idea of how that's going to be. That's the vibe I'm going to be rolling with. But we really want to look at making sure, like finding real ways that they can eat. And so if we get rid of the number component, if we just take away that and here are food sources or foods or drinks or whatever it is that will help you to perform, let's go with that. And if we just say, let's try some things, a lot of times we'll start with something super simple, like hydration. And that's a great entry point into success. And what I find is one of the best motivator I have is success. So when something works for a dancer, they want more of it. And it's like, that worked. And as they start to develop this confidence, because it can be really scary to change, especially, if you have a history of any sort of history of disordered eating or eating disorders, which I see all the time, this stuff can be a little bit scary. So we kind of sometimes baby step our way in. So let's say, for example, it's the hydration stuff, and they've heard if either from a clean eating perspective or, you shouldn't drink your calories or any of the stuff that, was alive and well when I was dancing. Then we unwork that. And I say, let's just try this. If this is where a struggle point is, let's try this hydration strategy and see how it works for you. And it does. And then it's like, okay, what else should I be doing? If this did this, then we're looking at one component. What can the rest do? Another place that I'll start with dancers that can be very effective and surprising to them is recovery foods, and aiming in and having specific recovery. And that it can be very simple, but it breaks down a couple barriers. One of which is a lot of times introducing foods that may be taboo because they don't fall under these presets they have of either low carb or clean or any of the frees, dairy free, gluten free, that some people do. It's important and necessary for them to follow, but not for everyone. And so they try that out, and then they notice how well they perform if we start including these. Oh, and also the idea of how late you can eat or drink things. We kind of demolish that. And then when they notice, because that's when we're really starting to get ready to fuel the next performance or the next bout of training. And when they see how much better they're feeling and how their recovery and their sleep and everything else is improving, and they are really ramping up simply because they have the energy and the strength to do it because they're giving their muscles and all the tissues what they need, then they're encouraged to keep on keeping on.
Yeah. With nutrition, I always find myself speaking from my own experience, mostly because I know how different nutrition is for every single person. And I have learned through the hard knocks of life that what works for someone else is not going to work for me, and has pushed me over the edge into many different areas. But what I want dancers to realize is that your nutrition, it starts from when we're born all the way to when we die, and it changes the needs, the way your body functions, what's happening. And I truly feel that having someone like you in your corner, that not only can you get a handle on what your body needs for your goals, but having a touch point where you can come back and check in and realize that our bodies are not feeling 100%. And I don't think that a lot of us realize what 100% feels like until you feel much better. Yeah. And then you're like, oh man, I've been living at 70, 60%. Again, speaking from experience, this is what close to 100% feels like. And I'm not even sure if it's 100%. But then I reach out and say, I have my people in my corner, and I go a year or two sometimes without checking in because I'm doing well. And then I start to feel like, oh, okay, my body is sluggish. things that normally happen in my body are not happening the same way, or my skin is breaking out, or whatever it is that I know is a warning sign for me. And I'm able to reach out and we can make changes that enhance my performance. And for me, performance, even though I'm not professionally dancing, and in that regard, I'm not even really dancing, but I want to have energy to make it through my day. I want to weight lift. I want to hike. I want to swim. That's the performance that I'm choosing, just as important as when I was dancing. And just having that person to realize there is an ebb and flow and there's constant change in our bodies and what's required was a big step for me and for my dancers who've started working with nutritionists like yourself. It's they just come back like their eyes are popping out of their head going, I had no idea that this is how I could feel, or that I was not feeling well. Really, you think you're feeling okay until you realize you're not.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree with you. And that idea of cycles and stages, and what, when you find what works for you, oftentimes then those touch point moments may be little shifts or pivots. They may not be anything significant, or they may be reminders like, hey, have you been doing, this? Remember that? Oh, I forgot about that. So you're right. Having that a history and a relationship with people who can help you and continue to help you out so that you feel your best is really helpful.
Yeah. We, in the dance world, we're so quick to take our time with privates and other things that revolve around the dance studio. And obviously those are important if you want to be a dancer, but cross training, I feel like is the next step that we think of, like, okay, I got to do a little bit of cross training. I have to go to Pilates. I need to weight lift, whatever it is. And I think that nutrition and mental health are still really lacking in the acknowledgement that is part of our athletic training, especially in the dance world, especially. So if we can, I want parents and kids and dancers to realize that part of your training as a dancer and performance is making sure that you're functioning from the inside out. And that doesn't have to be a daunting task that lasts forever, but it is a necessary if we want our bodies to do what we want for the rest of our lives.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because in the dance world, we're pretty encapsulated, mm-hmm. right? I mean, we don't necessarily pay as much attention to other athletes like team sports and things like that. I mean, you may, but we don't fall under, for young people, a lot of dancers go from their training to a professional status or to a college program, and their college programs very often are not under NCAA regulations. And if you were to be able to see if people and parents took a little bit of time to just look and see how Division I athletes are treated at a university level, it may be a little eye-opening, because what we know is a nutrition program is viewed as so valuable by the NCAA that they regulate it because it can be seen as an unfair advantage. So yeah, it's an unfair advantage to those teams who have more dietitians, more food allowance, more whatever. So they monitor and regulate that.
I didn't know that part of that. That's so eye-opening.
Yeah. So if
like,
this is,
oh my gosh, if that's what's happening, it's top of the game that you need to have.
Yeah, it's top of game. And these are the people who go on to make multiple $1 million, they have multiple $1 million contracts. I mean, that's a realistic, ambition, or maybe not realistic, but making millions of dollars if you get through, Division I is in certain mm-hmm. sports, is a real deal. And so I want our dance community to treat our dancers with that level of expectation that your bodies are worth that too. And you don't need a multi-million-dollar facility, like some colleges that got, just cafeteria and meal centers solely for the athletes, just for them. They have their dietitians, they have staff. And though dancers don't always have that, you can learn how to do it for yourself.
They never have that. I've never heard anyone that has had that.
I am so impressed when they're out of Florida, United Ballet Theater, when they put their facility together, they have a kitchen mm-hmm. and they have a full-size refrigerator for dancers to keep their meals. And I was just like, right on. Like this is, these are the kinds of things that they're small steps, but that idea that you should have, you should be treating your body really well, and your body deserves it, and you deserve it. And this is a thing that comes up. I hear a lot. I don't deserve it. I'm not worth this. And
we use food as a punishment tool for ourselves, not just as dancers, but I think in our society, especially as women, and I think in the athletic world, it heightens that. And then in the dance world, it just multiplies it so quickly, from staring in the mirrors to having teachers knowingly or unknowingly give cues or corrections that are perpetuating body types. And then on top of it, when you can look at somebody else and say, well, they're getting positive feedback, it must be because they look, feel, feet, flexibility, whatever it is, you can fill in the blank. It's so easy to, I want to say blame someone else's hypermobility or the shape of their waistline and be like, well, that's why they have that. We know that has nothing to do with why they're excelling. But I think it's really easy for all of us to kind of push the blame onto something else and then self-sabotage with something really easy, as in not eating or eating certain foods or limiting or whatever that looks like for each person.
Yeah. And that gamut can run pretty far.
Mm-hmm. Super far. Very, very far. Yeah. Well, we were saying, with looking at different types of bodies, and something that you specialize in is working with dancers with hypermobility and their nutrition. And I know that Allie 15 years ago did not know that was a thing. And I think that we might have just gotten a couple quick look backs as they're listening to the podcast saying, wait, there's nutrition for hypermobile dancers? And there is, and you are the person. So, and a big reason of why I wanted to chat with you. So what the big overall blanket that I hope gets us into a little deeper topic here is, how does our nutrition affect hypermobility?
Yeah. It's really interesting because a lot of times dancers will come to me with other issues. They've got bloating is very often. They either come with bloating or they've been referred by their PT, athletic trainer, something like that, because they're just having a hard time recovering. And so they don't even know that they may be on the hypermobile spectrum. Now, I'm not a physician. I don't diagnose these things, but I have, as part of that intake paperwork, I mentioned a lot of questions that will address your history that may bring that up. And so the first thing, I think when we talk about, I'm going to stop and go back. The first thing a lot of people think about when they're thinking hypermobility is connective tissue and connective tissue disorder. And if we're thinking connective tissue, collagen. So should we start throwing collagen at it? And we can talk about that too. The interesting part though, is that that's not why people come to me. They come to me because of these other things. They don't recover well. They're having issues with strength, and definitely the gut stuff. And then as we start unpacking that, we find there may be lots of other things that go there. So when we're talking about hypermobile dancers, there's a lot, because they have a lot of, it's not just the hypermobility, but they may have other what we call other ride along kind of conditions that can impact their nutrition or their performance, or both. So one is the gut issue. So connective tissue you have throughout your body, including from your mouth, the entire tract all the way down. And so if you have any issues with the connective tissue in your gut, that can cause problems. If you have anything, there's something else called dysautonomia that is common in hypermobile people. And if you have, if you're dysautonomic, that means your autonomic nervous system, the one that controls things that you don't think about, like your heart rate and your kidneys and glands secreting and hormones going, if it's not operating the way it would normally, that can cause problems, including things like swallowing and any part of the digestive tract. There can be things like ADHD is really common. Being on the autism spectrum are common. And so all of those things impact what you eat, how people choose to eat. Do they have food sensitivities? Like, are there things that they eat and they don't notice it, but they just don't tolerate them well? So there's just a lot there that we work with. It's not just the, hey, should we throw more collagen at it? Hey, should we eat more protein? We'll talk about that, but it's all this other stuff to how do we even get those things into your mouth and into your system and make sure that it's working. So those are a lot of the things I work with hypermobile dancers, whether they know it or not.
Mm-hmm. I recently did a little workshop with Dr. Bluestein, and her information was so insightful. And I just have this image of the list of things that a hypermobile person could be experiencing. And I remember gut was like a big one that stood out, headaches,
yeah.
Along with like the joint feelings, feeling like you can't gain muscle, which would, I'm sure, lead a dancer to coming to someone like you. And it's so interesting to tie that into smaller little pieces, because I know I hear a lot dancers say, well, I don't have connective tissue issues. Like it's not that bad. And they show me their elbow and, whatever. And again, not a doctor, but I can look at it and say, well, we should dig deeper into this. And I think that sometimes people think of a connective tissue order very specifically around the joints, and they don't recognize how much that actually impacts the way your gut works, the way you digest, the inflammation, like you said, even the way your heart moves. And anyone who's been listening to our hypermobility talks, we were talking about like Marfan's and having that really affect the heart tissue. So there's this large spectrum, and I'm imagining that nutrition can be a huge component in assisting to get symptoms managed, and also to keep maybe a baseline of this is how we want to feel, or how we know you can feel. If you start to vary off of this, there might be something bigger going on that we need to send you off to somebody and make sure that we're keeping things in track. And I'm imagining that you're kind of that person for the people that you work with who are hypermobile, kind of like sending them off to where they need to go based off of what you're seeing with their eating habits and nutrition and blood work or whatever else you see.
Yeah, for sure. If someone comes to me and they tick a lot of the blocks that suggest hypermobility, I will absolutely refer them to all the professionals I know that may be able to help them, from, MDs to PTs, athletic trainers, people who are familiar. And there aren't a lot of people who are familiar with hypermobility.
Yeah.
So that's why you want to work with people who are, and there's not, the research is still developing. So this is definitely a growing area of healthcare and medicine and dance medicine. And so things are changing a lot even as we go. So it is important to try and make those connections. What I find is interesting. So, if you can't eat a food, if you can't chew a food, if you can't swallow a food, if you can't digest a food, and a lot of people don't know when their digestion's off, that's something we work with, like we're all along the track. If you can't absorb the nutrients, they're not going to get where you need to go. And so that's important. So we need to know that. So if you can throw all the protein you want at a system, but if you can't digest and absorb it, it's not doing you any good. And that may end up causing problems because of other things, like you're displacing other nutrients. There's other stuff that can go on. We talk a lot about pain and inflammation with hypermobility. And so a lot, the go away recommendation from a generalist might be follow an anti-inflammatory diet. And that sounds really good on the surface. Unfortunately, a lot of the foods that are on an anti-inflammatory diet may specifically drive inflammation in that single person. So even though we may look and say, oh, the Mediterranean diet, it's great for the general population, they may do really well with that. If foods like tomatoes or oranges drive inflammation in you, and sometimes you'll see it in rashes, sometimes, and it doesn't even have to be an immediate thing. It can be a couple days later, like I'm just feeling like crap, or I've got brain fog now, or I've got a headache, and it's honestly it's from what we consider healthy foods. That's problematic. So then we can I'm familiar with those things. We might, say, hey, let's try this instead of for now, see how you feel. We can test to see if there's some sensitivities. Sensitivities are not the same as allergies. So someone who's allergic to a food, you usually notice it right away, like within 30 minutes. They may have swelling, they can't breathe, they need an EpiPen. Their respiratory and skin are common notations of that. So an allergy is an allergy. Some people outgrow them. A lot of times you don't. You need to avoid those foods. Hard stop. If you have an intolerance, that can be something like when you drink milk, you get gassy and but it's all kind of in your stomach and GI. That can be that you're missing one or more enzymes. And so if we make some shifts, you may still be able to tolerate the dairy if it serves you well. So it may be that you don't have to cut it out. We may need to adapt things, whether it's how much, when, what kind, or if we can support your body in other ways. And then there are sensitivities, and that can come from, in part, this idea of if your gut isn't working properly, or the connective tissue has been damaged in some way so that food proteins can get through, your body may recognize them as foe. And so when those foods come in later or in larger amount, it presents itself as inflammation. So it may be your skin breaks out, it can be pain, headache, fatigue, any number of things that we would put under that inflammatory umbrella.
And those are all things, and they're all things that would be inhibiting your body to be able to get the nutrients that it needs, whether it's at the beginning when you can't swallow, or when we end up that it's not digesting, or it's going through the linings and it's crossing over the barriers, whatever step that is, your body is not being fueled the way it needs to. And that can present in weight gain, in weight loss. There's a plethora of things that I think dancers, like you said, the bloating, these are all things that we think, oh, maybe I need to lose weight, or I have a specific answer. And we would come to someone like you and realize, oh, I actually need to switch my mindset to performance, change some of these things that are happening, and then move forward from there. I know I have a very similar, as you're describing, I was like, well, that's my story. And dang those tomatoes. It's been 2.5 years without tomatoes. And my thought when my doctor cut them out was, it's healthy. I love tomatoes. What are you telling me that this is it? But I had rashes all over my body, and we did a couple other, things that we cut out, and gosh dang it, it works. So, yeah. But it took blood tests, and it took trial and error, and it took me being committed and knowing that there was something deeper than just a weight gain or a weight loss that I was dealing with. It was how my body was feeling, not the way my body looked. I had to keep that in mind as I started down this journey. Otherwise, I would have deserted it a long time ago. And probably, at this point, I probably would have been kind of sick if I had kept going down that way, because my body was just kind of eating itself. It was not digesting. It was not assimilating. It was not doing its job. My inflammation, the histamine count was super high. And these are all things that I had no idea from the surface. All I saw was weight gain. And I was like, well, I'm eating healthy. I'm eating quote clean. I tried keto, I did all those things, and they didn't work. And it wasn't until I got to the root cause, and it's a continued work for myself to do that. But it feels good to do the work. And I feel the difference in my body, knowing a little deeper about me and not what Joe Blow down the street is doing. And I think you said it in the beginning, it's, you have, Aunt Susie who's telling you, well, I did this for 3 months and I lost all this weight, or I feel so much better. My skin cleared up, or I have all this energy. And, with respect to Aunt Susie, she's not the one that we want to be taking our advice from when we're talking about such an important topic, like your body working. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's great when those things do work for people, but really when we're in that hypermobile phase, it's very nuanced. And there's some things that are important to know about hypermobile dancers is that they're at, I mentioned they're at increased risk for, or have a greater likelihood of having ADHD, autism spectrum. And those are things that make a difference in eating. So you could lay out and say, oh, you should here's a standard plan for you. You should have some dairy-free yogurt with granola, and then this, and go for breakfast, and then go down the line with things, or have a smoothie. It's super healthy and easy to digest. But textures, if for people who are on the autism spectrum, whether they know it or not, I mean, it's a broad spectrum, can be a really big thing. And the idea of certain textures or different smells or different foods, they may be like, yeah, that's a hard no. And so they get labeled as being picky. But really, if we say, hey, it goes back to something and we just want to work with this, and maybe it's not the yogurt that they're refusing, maybe it's the combination. It needs to be either absolutely smooth, or for other people, it absolutely has texture to break up the smooth. But those are things we talk to. If for dancers who have ADHD, executive function can be really hard. So making decisions can be really hard. So how do we simplify things for you, or for, and for parents too, to work alongside if their dancer's a minor or still living at home, to put these things together so it's not complicated or overwhelming, or you're not like standing in front of the pantry and just like, I just was completely overwhelmed and now I have to leave or chase a squirrel or something glittery. And so that's part of it too, like making those decisions and then sorting through, even kind of circling back to the performance component, timing. When should we do what? So some people think, oh, this is we want to get rid of the idea of good food, bad food, because there's some things that I might recommend that would surprise people. And they would say, but that's not healthy. Mm-hmm. That's not clean. That's full of chemicals. No, it can be an effective tool. And we may use it sometimes, we may use it often, we may use it in certain circumstances. Things that come up would include, but are not limited to, white rice, breakfast cereal, pixie sticks, Rice Krispie treats, chocolate milk, Coca-Cola, the kind in the bottle from Mexico, not the kind with high fructose corn syrup. Those are all tools I use specifically. Oh yeah, Gatorade, these are things that sometimes surprise people, but they can be very effective. Hypermobile people need that. Sometimes they may need like, hey, what's the most digestible, easy thing we can get in to try with you? If they suffer from POTS, they may need to work on having more sodium. So drinking just water during training isn't going to cut it. And when we start adding extra sodium, whether it's in the form of a homemade sports drink, salty snacks, tablets, whatever, they may notice a distinct improvement in their performance. When we start adding recovery foods that also help replenish that sodium, they may turn a corner that they didn't know they were stuck behind. So that can be for all dancers, but definitely hypermobile dancers. Those are things that we're working in to help them maximize where they're at.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You said at the beginning, probably the first thing that I think most people think of when hypermobility and their nutrition is collagen and protein. Yeah. And we just discussed how it doesn't matter. It could not matter how much you're eating. If your body's not able to digest it and use it, then we have many more problems than how much you're actually putting into your mouth. But I do think that is something that people go to really quickly. And is that a good place for somebody to start who is wondering about their nutrition and their hypermobility, and they're not seeing someone like you yet? Is that a good place to start? Is there somewhere else that they could start with a super basic recommendation? Does it even matter? Because if you're not digesting, then you're just putting things in your mouth. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's really tough with here's where I'm going to start with most hypermobile people. And this one, again, a little surprising. It's how you eat. Mm-hmm. How you eat matters. And a lot of times people aren't the process of digestion starts at your head. It starts with your brain. It starts about thinking about food. It starts with smelling food, seeing food. All these sensory experiences before you've even taken a bite are very important, because these what we call cephalic from the brain, ding, 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 when those, hey, things are coming, you see the smoothie, the food, you smell it. That's traditional. We aren't this idea of you can just like grab something out of a package or a drive-through or have your food Ubered to you where you didn't have any part of its, preparation, is really new to the human body. We may have had things since TV dinners and Kraft mac and cheese, where things come together pretty quickly, for the past few decades, maybe since the 1960s. but it's new. Okay. So the body and the brain has not evolved. The body has not evolved beyond the fact that it's going to go through a process of expecting things. That also means that's when gastric juices start flowing. So if you do not have enough hydrochloric acid and the other enzymes that enter your stomach to help break down food, you're going to have a problem. So the first thing I want dancers to do, the first thing I would recommend is slow down. If you can't, and we can't always do it. Like, I get it. That's part of being a dance dietitian is I work with, well, these are our limitations. What game on? What's our challenge? How can we meet the challenge? But when you do have time, or try this at home, if you have a day on your day off, if you have, hopefully you have more than one day off, but at breakfast, if that's a possibility, at dinner, sometime when you can sit down and be quiet. And, if you can fix some food, great. If you're smelling the food and sitting down and then chewing your food 15 to 20 times to the point that where it's applesauce or yogurt consistency. If you're having applesauce or yogurt, you're not going to take that many chews, but chewing that, and that process of chewing there's enzymes in your mouth that start to break down the food too. And so that entire process can help. There's some simple tests you can do to just get an eyeball, to get an idea. Are you making enough hydrochloric acid? It's common that people aren't, especially if they're under a lot of stress. So if that's the case, you may want to add more acid to your meals, or maybe a shot of, apple cider vinegar, diluted before you eat. That can be a game changer for a lot of people, particularly my hypermobile clients. There are supplements you can take if you're not producing enough that make it easier, especially if the thought of a vinegar shooter isn't very appealing. So that would be it, is sit down and be mindful and plan 30 minutes to eat, including smelling your food, notice no screen distractions, pleasant company. So don't talk about things that are upsetting. Maybe leave politics for another time, but talk about pleasant things. Music is fine. You could listen to a podcast if it's listening or feels conversational, but no screens, and see how that helps your process.
I like that. I know when I started slowing down, actually for me, it was breakfast, because I used to wake up as with the least amount of time possible to get to work or dance or whatever it was. And breakfast was on the go. And sometimes it was like standing in a bus, dodging people, eating half a granola bar, because you don't want to feel too full before you take bar. But when I started changing that morning habit for myself, waking up earlier, which was not fun to start with, I admit it, but my day went so much better once I got over that waking up grumpy morning hump that was there for me. And I sat down. I did not take 30 minutes, but I took 15 minutes, and I gave myself time to just be in the morning. And for me, I put that more on like my mental state calm down. I wasn't as rushed and running around, but I can absolutely see how all those things you mentioned were also happening in that very small time. And now as an adult, where I do try to take more time to sit down, more time to just, for me, it's just not doing things, no screen, no extra stimulation. I don't want to talk about work. I don't want to talk about politics. That dinner time, I find myself feeling full. I think that's probably the best way to say it, is I notice when I feel full. And I think that on the go, that was a big thing for me. And I hear that from a lot of dancers, and tying that into, some of that sensory stuff and swallowing, and then looking at what enzymes are you making. It all just kind of ties together in my mind. It's an excellent suggestion.
Yeah. Even if dancers just did the sole thing of sitting down, that would make a big difference. If you sat down every time you eat, sit down. That's a food rule I could get behind, because when you're standing, you engage the sympathetic nervous system. And what we want when we eat is the parasympathetic. That's the rest and digest. And we want to give all the energy to that parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest. So if you would just sit down, that would be that's pretty doable. It's easy. It's simple, but it's not always easy.
Yeah. And when you're working with the average hypermobile dancer, about how long are you working with them on their nutrition journey?
Between 4 and 6 months.
That's pretty short, actually.
Yeah. A lot of times that gives them a really good start. And then they kind of fly away butterfly. And then we may come back for some touch points,
right,
as needed. But when I work with dancers, it is pretty high touch. So during that period of time, in addition to the sessions we have, all my dancers get access to an app that is a photo food journal. So if we decide that's a tool we want to use, they use that. So I'm checking in with them whether talking, usually not talking, but I'm seeing what they're doing. I'm giving them some sort of feedback, catching up on what they're doing a couple times a week. They have access to message me if they have questions in between time. So it's pretty intense, and it's kind of like summer intensive. You get a lot out of those 5 weeks because you're really in, except this is looking more at typically 4 to 6 months. That would be the typical time frame.
Yeah. But I mean, realistically, when we think back to you're born with nutrition, you die with nutrition, everything in between, we need to work on in some way. 4 to 6 months is not a long time. Yeah. I know when we get into our older years, or lots of ignoring that can happen, I think, for young dancers, or habits that aren't the healthiest, following the trends of paleo, keto, blah, 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 yo-yoing in our decisions, no consistency. And I'm sure you have other things to add to that. It can kind of throw our body into a little bit of disarray. And then later on, I see lots of people, including myself, that we end up in a spot where it's like, it takes more time to make these things happen, to heal and to make our body work from the inside out. I've shared tiny bit about some of my nutrition journey. But I think I was working with someone once a week for over 1.5 years. And it's, and again, it was because I had gotten to a certain point and there was a lot of trial and error and checking in, and I was dealing with rashes and extreme bloating and, extreme weight gain, and it would fluctuate so quickly. So there was a good driving factor for me because I was seeing it on the outside and I was really experiencing it. But I don't want I don't want anyone to get to that point. Getting a knowledge and a handle on what gives you your body the ability to perform well, I think is the perfect benchmark for anyone, because that's going to be a little different for everyone. But performance, no matter if you're actively dancing or you're a past dancer or you're a mom, no matter what it is, performance, we want to perform in our day. We want our day to go the best that it possibly can. So I really, really love the benchmark of your own performance versus whatever trendy thing we can put on top of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, the younger we can get dancers to address these things, we solve a lot of problems. It's the prevention is worth a pound of cure, and we can start to offset disordered eating, which is rampant, unfortunately. We can offset perhaps injury. And when we have multiple people in that, if you have a dietitian and a trainer and PT and all these people who kind of come from their different perspectives on that wheel of, hey, let's look at this. I might say, hey, let's try some collagen. And I want you to try it with this timing and in this format. I don't want you to do it willy-nilly. I want it like this specifically. And let's see how that works. And that's, and what do hey, what are you doing with Allie? Oh, okay, great. Then do it. Then when you're done, that I want you to have this afterward, see how that feels, and then let's go from there.
So when you work with people, do you work only in person? Do you do virtual? What does your style look like these days?
Yeah, these days I've turned to completely virtual.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if I have any. I don't think I have any in-person clients anymore. If they were, then they go virtual too. And people seem to like, even people who are in my town, it's just easy because
it's a very easy thing to do virtually.
Yeah. And people are used to it. So I am totally virtual. I work with dancers, like I said, across North America. And then I will be starting a membership program this spring so that dancers who may not feel like they want that one-on-one, but would like some education as well, some dance specific education, as well as some, practical ways to implement it. Like, how can I do this? And someone that they can come to, once a month with questions for a Q&A to answer their questions. I'm putting that together. So those are my 2 formats as of right now.
Well, that platform will be wonderful. And, we've said this several times now and during this time, but just having somebody who can assist you to build a base is going to do so much for our dancing bodies, for our average human bodies. And if I can't encourage enough, if you are a dancer and have never worked with someone, and you're not looking for something very, very specific, as in I don't have a specific thing going on in my body, your program sounds like the perfect fit for that. It really does. And it's a while. You're working with you for more than just a couple weeks. It's really taking you through all the seasons that happen in a year, and our nutrition changes, our stresses change, along with the seasons. But there's so much change happening that being able to stick with you for that long would be an amazing opportunity.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. And you've brought that up a number of times. It's the season of dance. There's not an off season for dancers, but there's intensive and audition and, spring performance, nutcracker, competition, depending on what your genre is. And so, how do you navigate all those things and not lose your mind or
your health.
For your health. Yeah. So So I'm doing, it'll be a 12-month opportunity, and something new coming up once a month, so that hits all those kind of seasonal changes and opportunities and experiences.
That's awesome. That's amazing. I can't wait for that to come out. And if you're listening to this after it's been recorded, then I'm sure I'll have links and things available for you guys when that comes out. But where can everyone find you, and what would be the best way to get in touch with you?
Sure. You can find me on Instagram, and my handle is Kristin, Kristin _ Koskinen, Koskinen, show notes, _ RDN, or my website. And you can message me on Instagram or my website, which is eatwellpros.com.
Awesome. If this struck a chord, you realize that you might have some things going on that you'd like to address, now is the time. And Kristin is the person. She's and really, like she said about other practitioners, there's not a lot of people who work with hypermobility, and there's not a lot of people who work with it well. And you absolutely fall into that category. She's part of the Bendy Bodies team, which you guys have heard quite a bit from Jennifer Milner and Dr. Bluestein. It's a great asset to have in your back pocket. And for anyone who's new to the podcast, I always tell people that this information may not be for you right this moment, but you will have this in the back of your mind. And when it comes up, or when you have someone in your community that you hear an issue and you're like, oh, actually, I actually know exactly where to go for that. Here's this information. I don't think that we don't need everything in our dancing life right this second, but it will come. And it will come, and the moment will come, and you'll have a tool in your pocket. And I think being on Instagram has definitely opened those doors for people, but keeping in mind that falling into this category of hypermobility and working with dancers who are truly dealing with this, it's a small category. So bookmark this one, go find Kristin and follow her on Instagram. And I wish you all luck with your hypermobility nutrition. Let me know how it goes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me and share your expertise. If anyone has questions, please reach out to Kristin. She would be more than happy to assist you, putting you in the right place and getting maybe an evaluation going to assist you guys. And like we said, now is the time to handle these things so you can continue to perform in the studio the way you would like to. So thank you so much, Kristin. This has been amazing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Allie. I really appreciate you having me on.
You're welcome.
You're awesome.
Thank you, everyone who listened. This was a very insightful conversation for me. And I know from personal experience that how we build the inside affects the outside more than sometimes we want to admit. And working with someone like Kristin can really, really just give us the boost that we need to be successful and have all areas of our life be successful. So whether you choose to reach out to Kristin and this becomes a resource for you, I highly recommend that you follow her on Instagram. She has a lot of information and a lot of things for you to start considering and making shifts. I love the recipes that she posts. I'm constantly checking to see what she's come up with and what she's suggesting for dancers. So go check her out there. Please reach out to her if you have any questions. I know she is more than happy and excited to assist all dancers, all genres, all ages, all varieties. And you can always find me and more information on the work that I'm doing and the people I'm partnering with, like Kristin, on Instagram at Align Fitness by Ali. You can also send me an email, info@alignfitnessbyali.com. I'd be happy to hear from you and assist you to find the avenue that is going to move you forward in your dancing. So dancers, I will see you all right back here next time on Beyond the Point.